Home Grown Filmmakers, it's Annie here with another vlog, and today I'll be talking with Phillip about his death ray. Inception music.
I'm Phillip, and this is my death ray. This one is kind of built on our previous project, Weeping Willow. I had made this base piece here as a pedestal for all of the tributes to stand on. You know, like they all rise up out of the ground and they're standing on some big pedestal thing. I had built this one for that film, and we'd only built one because I didn't have time to build 24 of them. So we ended up doing them all digitally. But here I had this thing that I had built that we never used, and so when this project came around and I heard about the death ray, I'm like, well, I have this pedestal thing, how can I use that? So that's what I started with as a base. I wasn't sure how I was going to do the rest of it, so I started on my computer again, basically doing a sketch. And this is what I ended up with. I knew, like, there's a really rough sketch of the pedestal. I knew I was going to use that, and I just went from there, like, again, going through a bunch of different sci-fi movies from the era that we were trying to emulate, looking through them and looking for weird machines and props that had been built for those films. And going, okay, so here's the kind of elements that they put on those to make them look all sci-fi and futuristic like. That's what I ended up drawing. And since it was what I had drawn, it was what I built.
Yup.
Now the first thing that I did was actually, I had to figure it all out in my head. I had to figure out how much material I need because I was on a budget. I had to know how much I was, had to check up on how much everything cost so I know how much I was going to spend. The whole art department budget was $300, but that included like all of the period costumes that we bought for the 70s bit. I think I only ended up with 150 of that, and I only spent like 130 of it. First thing I actually did was I converted the drawing into a 3D model so I know how big everything was, again using Blender. After I had done that, I could have a calculation of like how much surface area there was, which turned into how much I ended up buying too much, but how much MDF and things like 2x4s and sheet plywood that I would need in order to build it. And then the next thing was off to the hardware store to buy all the materials. After I got back, the first things that I built were these two side pieces. And they are basically smaller pedestals. The pedestal is a really simple construction. It's just, like there's a disc on the bottom, a disc on the top connected by these 2x4s. And the real challenge there is just getting the angles on these cuts right so that it's as tall as you wanted it to end up. Same here, except for these panels, which are just fabric, are on the outside instead of on the inside. Another thing that I did was I made these octagons instead of circles. So that was the first thing, was just sort of laying out octagons. It's a bit of math, but it's not that hard. For these ones, just to save on wood, what I had done was I made a big octagon and then just cut a smaller one out of it. So it was the same piece of wood, and I didn't have to, basically double the amount of wood that I was using just for these pieces. I wouldn't have minded if there wasn't a hole here, but it does add a little bit to the texture of the death ray. And like I said, this skin here is fabric. What you can do is take muslin fabric and soak it in. I used a solution of water and like Elmer's white glue. I think you can just put like straight Elmer's glue on, but I watered it down just a little bit to give it a little bit more pliability. But when it dries, it sort of shrinks and tightens up into a hard skin, which can then be painted and all manner of interesting things done to it. What I had done was I had built the two frames for these and painted up and applied all the muslin, and while it was all drying, I started on this center console again, I had done the calculations, so like I knew how big I wanted these panels to be, so that was just a process of measuring those out. And then come around the back here, let's see the internal framing. Basically, I have, you know, a couple panels, and then these sticks just holding it all together. There's a beam going across to hold on the two side pieces. Then after that, I started on the center can. This is a piece of sheet metal. You can just get fairly large flat sheets of it that are designed for making bits of air ducting. Like, here's the furnace for our house using these just big pieces forming these big square air ducts. Those are pretty cheap at the hardware store. And this was just that, just sort of curled into a cylinder, slot cut out of it, some parchment paper. On set we put a flashlight in there to light up the whole chamber so that it would look like something was going on in there. These rivets are just thumbtacks. As you can see, I pressed them in all over the place to just add some detail and texture to the model. This is more of that ABS tube that I use on the jetpack, along with various pieces of MDF, just all put together. Again, you can kind of see emulating what I had done in the drawing. I thought it was an interesting retro looking shape. Here we have a vegetable steamer, some parts out of an old TV, not the same old TV as the one that I talked about in the props video, but I've taken apart like 4 or 5 old TVs. Some aluminum rod and a bouncy ball.
How many cans of silver spray paint do you think you've gone through?
This one? This one was only 2.
Only 2.
It didn't I thought I would need more, and I ended up with a couple of extra cans, but I think I only ended up using 2 of them. When I had started planning out, I hadn't fully figured out how I was going to do a lot of these detail pieces. The ones that I knew for sure that I was going to use was this old CB radio. Found that in the thrift store while we were costume shopping for the 70s bit, and I'm like, I probably would have bought it even if we weren't making a film, just because I collect cool gadgets like that. But I knew I wanted that in there, so you know I cut a slot for that so I could jam it into this front panel. This thing ended up being kind of a last minute addition. I was like, yeah, I should probably have one of those old knife switches, so found a model for that on Thingiverse, just printed it out. Some, again, just more salvage parts from various old bits of hardware. I don't even know what that thing was. When I had drawn the model, I knew what I wanted for these. This is iron pipe, just a galvanized iron pipe. Straight section with an elbow, another straight section going in there. And then this is, they call it refrigeration tubing. It's really, really soft copper tubing that's easy to make into coils like this. It's really malleably easy to bend and form. And I'd seen a lot of these coil-like things on other various doomsday devices and other machinery from that era, so I knew I wanted to put something like that on there. For these pieces, these sort of like electrical insulator things, I didn't know exactly what or how I was going to pull that off, but I had seen some similar stuff on a device in one of the reference photos that I found. It was Mom who came up with the idea of using styrofoam bowls. So I bought about 100 of those to stick on all over the place, along with, you know, this is just, I think it's irrigation tubing, so like what you'd make a sprinkler system out of. Just bought like a 100-foot roll of that, cut out stuff. I made these square wooden spikes for the things out of scrap wood. Just drill a hole in the end, route it around.
dun, dun.
All in all, the process for figuring out and then building something, it's a constant cycle of, well, here's what the look I'm going for. I can't afford to make it look exactly like that. What kinds of things look kind of like that? How much do they cost? Just sort of solving lots of little problems until you end up with the whole piece.
So how long do you think it took you to make the whole thing?
Start to finish, I think I was working on this thing for like 2 months.
What was the most challenging piece of it?
It was probably these two pedestal pieces and the center console section. The construction of them is a lot of math and calculations that you have to kind of know beforehand before you actually start cutting stuff out. I had made the computer model. I had how big I wanted it to be when I end up, but you sort of have to translate that into how big do you make each individual piece. I wanted from this edge to the parallel edge on the bottom to be 3 feet, which means that a 3-foot circle will fit inside this octagon. That doesn't mean that this octagon will fit inside a 3-foot circle. Circles are sort of the basic way for laying stuff out, which means that the distance from a corner to the center is some irrational number based on the hypotenuse of the right triangle from the edge to the center to the corner. And so the length of an edge ends up being a really wacky irrational number. You know, dealing again with more trigonometry, getting the angled cut on the 2x4 right so that this distance ends up being a foot. And then you have to make them all the same. So a lot of just like doing little sketches, little math problems, pull out your calculator, calculate a little bit. Nope, that wasn't it. Sort of shuffling around with the dimensions until you end up with what works. That's what we mean when we separate art from craft. Art is the process of building the image, the feeling that it's supposed to evoke from you when you look at it. You're supposed to go, I'm in the 30s, you know, watching some sci-fi. That is the art of it. And all of that was in the research and the drawing, the sketches. From there, it transitions into the craft of it, and that is all of the calculations and the skill that goes into knowing what sizes to make all the pieces so that they all fit together to build the artistic vision. Like this piece here, you know, it's 3 discs, but they'll have to be spaced on some dimensions, and they'll also be the same dimensions because these pieces all have to have 3 slots that are just big enough to hold all this, and so you end up having to do all of these little, you know, measurements, sketching all these lines on it, drawing all these lines on it so that they all end up being the right size to fit together. And I didn't get it right. You can see there's a gap there. I got it mostly right. Right enough to look good on camera. And that's where the craft of it is versus the art, which is like, this is the art, but you need the craft to get to that. I think it fulfilled the purpose that I wanted it to. I was really glad that when they were filming it, we put like a big can light in the back to light up Simon's face when he flipped the switch and like turned it on. And I didn't want them to do that because this is a fabric surface and I wasn't 100% sure that the paint would keep the light from just shining through it basically. But it turned out looking okay. I'm happy about that. I'm not going to keep it in the garage. It's just taking up way too much space. Maybe I'll try to sell it. If nobody wants it, we'll have a bonfire.
Aww.
I'll keep the various pieces of it. You know, I'll keep these because I can reuse those. I can reuse that. And I can reuse pieces of it. But like these big sections that are, you know, they're so specific that they can't be reused. I might just end up having to destroy it.
Well then, this is farewell to the Deathray. Goodbye, Deathray, you served us well.
Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed the sneak peek look at the making of the Deathray. If you guys have any questions, any videos that you would like to see, please comment down below and I will try to make a video about it. If you guys like the videos, please like and subscribe. subscribe. We are with Zohu Productions, a production company in Washington State made up of 2 home-educated families. I'm Annie Poling, and I host these vlogs documenting our adventures.